6 and 7 oil strut. It keeps the bearings oiled. Back them, dog. And it's just a slight turn, and you just record what the gauge is sitting at.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we have a 100 hour on a 530F. As you can tell by the extended tail boom right there, very different from your D and your E models. And I usually would have started the video off by the engine inlet, but this time I'm starting it off here with the tail transmission. So when I'm inspecting the tail transmission here, I'm looking for play and where those bolts are, kind of where the bell crank is. And it uses a lot of bushings, and bushings tend to wear out over time, and then that's what you have to replace. But I'm checking those eye bolts, I'm checking those elastomerics in there, spinning the blade. You can teeter the blades right here, and the elastomerics will move back and forth. So that's what I did. And then here, part of the inspection here on the tail and the transmission, or the tail transmission, is retorquing those mounting bolts. And on a D model you would do those 4 mounting bolts, but since this is extended, we're gonna have to go ahead and do 8. And after I'm done torquing down the nut, I put on some torque stripe just to have an easy detection method to see if that nut got loose. So moving on, I'm checking the tail boom to the fuselage mounting. I'm looking for gaps in between those rivets there. That's the mating surface of the 2 pieces. And it's mainly just held on by 4 bolts on the inside.
That is the number 6 and 7 oil strut. Number 6 and 7 bearing oil strut. It keeps the bearings oiled.
So there in the middle of your screen are the 4 bolts that hold on the fuselage to the tail boom. And right now I'm just looking down the tail boom. It's just hollow. It's just hollow in a few tubes, and a drive shaft, and then the push rod for the tail pedals. It's mainly just pretty empty in there. And right here I'm looking at the mating surface of the tail boom to the vertical and horizontal stabilizer. Just looking at the skin, making sure there's no corrosion, no cracks, or any like stress panels. Here I'm looking at the position light, and that looks pretty good to me. So here I'm checking the engine inlet area. It's very open on the F models, just because of the way the air filters are and how much access you have through there. So I can get my shoulder and my head through there, and look how spacious it is. And if I took that top filter off, there would be even more space into that engine inlet. So I'm just looking for security of the wires, looking for any damage to any of those wires, the security of the hardware, and any damage to the inlet guide vanes. So this is the air filter where I was shining my light through. It would be installed there. It's a Donaldson air filter, and a lot of MDs use this kind of air filter now these days. So this is actually really cool. What you're looking at is the tail drive shaft connected to the coupling, and then in front of the coupling is the rotor brake disc, and then from the rotor brake disc is the main gearbox. You're also seeing the brake caliper on top of that brake disc, some hydraulic lines, oil lines, electrical wires, and connected to the gearbox are other instrument gauges. So now we're doing an engine chip light test. So my coworker in the back is shorting the chip with a wire, and it should illuminate here on the instrument panel, and it does. So that's how we know it's working.
Yeah, that worked.
Now this part of the inspection is the tail rotor pedal bell crank train assembly. So there's a ton of bell cranks coming from the foot pedals all the way up and back to the back of the helicopter, all the way off to the tail rotors. So it goes up here to the top of the fuselage. Check all the push rods there, make sure there's no cracks, no corrosion. Checking the boot. Remember in last video when that boot was cracked, we had to fix it. So that's just rubber, so it's just going to age over time, but it looks good. Now I'm just taking a look back here down the system. So I'm at the biggest part of the inspection, the rotor. And if I were to film everything, this would probably be 3 30-minute videos. This is the longest part of the inspection, so everything's all sped up here. But mainly checking PCRs, checking the blade attachments, the blade dampers, checking the rollers, checking the droop stops, the lead lag stops, checking for corrosion on the mast, checking the swash plate, and just other damage in that area. But there's a lot I could talk about, but it would be in another video, in another long video. But this is just a glimpse into what I'm looking at here on the rotor. So this area is where the oil reservoir is. You can see some oil lines there. This is where the oil cooler is behind that fiberglass tube right there. And just checking for corrosion and make sure everything's secure. This is the main gearbox. You can see there's a lot going on, a lot of chip detectors, empty oil, more electrical wire. That's the drive shaft. Everything's looking good there. That can't be damaged. And just checking for security and mounting of all the hardware that's in that corner there. And then this is just the bottom view of the brake disc. So you can see the drive shaft and the bottom side of the gearbox and the belt that turns the oil cooler fan. Now this is the electrical underneath the pilot side. So everything's routed, very dense work. There are upgrades to this 530, so this is more wires than usual and more modules that are installed into the cockpit. You'll see it here when I pan the camera down to the right for a little fuel module. Yep, fuel quantity signal conditioner. That's what it is. So part of this inspection is removing the tail drive shaft. It's a 2-man job. I did most of the work here, making sure it didn't scrape across the airframe. So I'm lifting up on the tail drive shaft, making sure it doesn't hit anything, and then I take it out and then I walk it over to the sawhorses. Here's a little close-up view of the tail drive shaft, that coupling, and then that tail rotor transmission. So we're changing the drive from the tail rotor shaft 90 degrees into the tail. So here I'm just actuating the trim switches, as you can hear. Yep, so those work. Pilots can actuate that as they're flying. And then here I'm just checking for unusual binding, metal fatigue, damage to the whole pilot control system.
Colin!
Something binding in there?
Not. It's smooth.
Really?
It's really smooth. Yeah. Yes. Magnum dog?
Because you feel like you're actually fucking greasing this shit.
Okay. And then
Oh wow, look at that. Oh, that black.
old grease.
Yeah. That looks awesome. That works great.
It didn't come out on this side yet.
No, it's coming. All right. Screw it down until it engages the self-locking feature, which is the tapered end, which is you'll be able to tell because you can't do it anymore. self-locking feature is engaged. If it goes on all the way without you, and you can do it by hand, that's a bad nut. Don't fucking use that nut. All right, then it's just a slight turn, and you just record what the gauge is sitting at, which is about 3. Okay, that's cool. You can do it again if you want, but you got to do nice and smooth. So right now it's at 0. When you go, see that difference there? Yep. That's your run on torque, your drag torque. How much force it takes to get that nut down.
If you're in aviation maintenance, you know that you've done the classic pitot heat test. Turn it on, make sure it works, warms up the hand, and then you go ahead and turn it off, and then that's how you know it works. So here's a little time lapse of me and my coworker putting the blades back on. There's 5 blades, and these blades are longer than the D model that you see off to the left of the screen, the black one. So the blades that we're putting on are longer than those, and there's 5, and they're not too hard to put on. Everything's held on by 3 pins, and you just align everything, put the pins in, and then you rotate the head.